My name is Dave Reist, and we are you're at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. On behalf of Mr. Mike Swetnam, our CEO, and the chairman of our Board of Regents, General Al Gray, the 29th Commandant of the Marine Corps, it's a pleasure to host this event today. Potomac Institute is a not-for-profit public policy research institute that was founded in 1994. We focus on science, technology, and national security issues, and pride ourselves on remaining nonpartisan in the debate on issues, with the goal of informing public policy. We have several events such as this in areas of terrorism and neuroethics, and our newly formed Potomac Institute Cyber Center will soon be embarking on some featured events. Please stay tuned to our website. Today we have 80+ years of experience to speak about naval capabilities. Specifically, the ongoing, and along with 20 of those are yours, General Hejlik, you account for the rest. Specifically, the ongoing exercise termed the Bold Alligator.
You're going to pay.
I know I will, sir. You have their biographies that outline their substantial history and their contributions to both their service and to our nation at large. And you came here to hear them. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Admiral Harvey, the Commander of Fleet Forces Command, and Lieutenant General Hejlik, Commander of Marine Forces Command. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, very much. Well, it's an honor to be here with all of you. See a lot of familiar faces here in uniform and outside of it. And I'm glad of this opportunity to renew some friendships that we haven't kept up on for a couple of years anyhow. But thanks for the privilege of being with you today. I want to give you a little bit of the context that I approached setting up Bold Alligator with, and then General Hejlik will do the same thing from his perspective. When I took command of Fleet Forces down in July 2009, there were several things that I believe would be absolutely critical during my tour and have a significant impact on how I prepared the forces for which I was accountable for their deployments. First, and most obvious, the high level of unrest and conflict around the globe, I believe, would certainly continue and perhaps intensify even while we withdrew from Iraq and prepared for the drawdown in Afghanistan. Growing tensions in the South China Sea, unrest throughout the Middle East, it certainly continues to this day, as we see in Syria, the continued spread of terrorism and fundamentalist violence, growth of piracy, transnational criminal organizations throughout sub-Saharan Africa, and certainly Iran's march to develop nuclear weapons and all that that portends for our future. It seems all the pots on the stove are boiling, and that we can certainly expect several of them to routinely boil over, and we will have to deal with that. And all this disorder, all this constant unrest, will be taking place in a very, very complex battle space we term the littorals, where high-end weapons are proliferating to low-end organizations. Precision capability is spreading, and consequently, in my professional opinion, there are no such things as a benign operational environment anywhere we can expect to go. The littorals are crowded, congested, confused, and complex. There's a great deal of action there, and sorting out who's who in the zoo can be really, really difficult. The third thing is, while this global maritime equivalent of what General Krulak termed years ago the three-block war was growing geographically and in complexity, I was fairly certain that the resources available to me to prepare my forces for deployment were going to decrease. And I have not been disappointed in that belief. And I believe future budgets will continue to show a decrease in the resources available to the Department of the Navy. Now, when I put all this together, and I looked at the mission that I have to prepare fleet forces, to prepare aviation, surface, submarine, and expeditionary units for deployment, it was the first thing that came to me in a very, very striking fashion. Very, very clear that we needed to have a far more productive relationship with our Marine Corps counterparts and reinvigorate our naval operational capabilities at every level. so that we could develop coordinated, well-coordinated, not coordinated on the fly, but well-coordinated and deeply integrated responses to meet the challenges of that evolving global security environment that I spoke of earlier. Because it will be the Navy Marine Corps team which will be our nation's first responders to the crises that will inevitably occur. Again, early in my tour was the Haiti earthquake that really brought this home to me in a very, very compelling fashion. No violence, but certainly a great deal that the Navy Marine Corps team had to do and was expected to be able to do by this nation and by our leaders. Now, let me give you just a rough timeline of the flow of forces that came out of the Navy Marine Corps in response to that terrible event. The earthquake occurred on the 12th of January at 16:53 Eastern Standard Time. I got the word via Wolf Blitzer on CNN at 18:15. I was in the VFQ at the Washington Naval Yard, relaxing after the 4-star conference. It was always a draining event. We immediately started responding and seeing, okay, what's available now, what's in the theater, what's moving, what do we divert, all the standard things you'd be thinking about. A destroyer, the USS Higgins, was transiting from CENTCOM and about to go through the Panama Canal on her way back to San Diego. She had 2 helos aboard, immediately diverted to go and start building situational awareness as best she could. As you remember, the deputy commander of Southern Command was in the hotel virtually at ground zero, and he narrowly escaped death. His aide was killed in the earthquake. No communications. There was nothing coming out of Haiti of any kind of knowledge. So building that essay was critically important. USS Carl Vinson, the CVN 70, was underway en route on a home port shift around South America. They were anticipating a port call in Rio de Janeiro. They didn't get Rio de Janeiro. They got Haiti. And we diverted them at maximum speed to head direct for Haiti. And while they passed Mayport and Jacksonville, we loaded her with helos on the fly to have that capability when she arrived on station on the 15th of January. The Bataan ARG had just returned from deployment, 6-month deployment to the Mediterranean CENTCOM, 30 days prior to the earthquake. They were on a 96-hour PTDO, prepared to deploy set of orders. We gave them 48 hours to recall, get underway, and go, head to Onslow Bay, reload 22nd MEU, and 22nd MEU was there on the piers when the Bataan arrived and reloaded in about 12 hours with a bias towards HADR type of heavy engineering equipment. A tremendous feat by the MEU commander, Colonel Brandel. Comfort, the 5-day PTDO up in her lay berth in Balmer. She was ordered to get underway, made it in 3 days, and we were throwing doctors, nurses, and corpsmen on her as she transited down the bay and then down the East Coast towards Haiti. She arrived on the 20th of January. So we set up a logistics hub in Gitmo during that same amount of time, and I mustered a lot of the MSC ships to come down to load up in Norfolk and then head south with their HADR supplies. So the Navy Marine Corps team was on site in very large numbers when they were needed and where they were needed. They supplied over the beach and while we reopened the port. There was a significant capability afloat with minimal footprint ashore, which even in a period of a tremendous disaster like the earthquake was, that minimal footprint ashore, as we saw in Indonesia following the tsunami in 2004, was a very, very important planning factor as we calibrated the nation's response. So it was a compelling demonstration of naval capability that came early on my tour and made a tremendous impression on me. We are inherently expeditionary. It is in our DNA. It is not a label we affix put on ourselves. It is a way we do business. It is the way we have been brought up. It means something very, very special to us to be expeditionary in the fullest sense of the word. And we are very, very flexible in how we can respond to whatever we're told to do. So rapid response for humanitarian assistance and disaster relief is certainly good, but we need an equally effective response, rapid and decisive across the full range of military operations. And so there we get the Bold Alligator. It represents, to me, in the most fundamental sense, the Navy Marine Corps' revitalization, the revitalization of the full range of amphibious operations. On the East Coast, we haven't done an exercise like this in 10 years. It was well past time to do so, given the world we face and given the expected response from both the COCOMs and our national leadership of what the Navy and Marine Corps team will deliver on very, very short notice. We bring options that are unique to the team and go far beyond simply putting an ARG-MU together and throwing it across the ocean. It's a key concept for us, providing a wide range of options from a single, coherent force package. So to us, to me, the Navy Marine Corps team cannot just be a cute catchphrase that we throw around to make ourselves feel good. It's got to be real in the fullest sense of that term. It is a statement of fact. And that's what Bold Alligator is to reinforce. The naval force responding in a compelling way for the leadership to provide options. That Navy Marine Corps team, it is something, and it's not just a slogan. At least ships can't operate ashore, and Marines can't walk on water.
When did we stop doing that? Hey, sir, thank you very much. And for everybody, hey, thanks for the opportunity. We're really, really glad to be here. I know a lot of you, so again, thanks. And one of the things I want to talk about and stress first is there's a human factors involved in the naval force. And I say that only because when Admiral Harvey was talking about the Haiti and the 22nd ARG-MU with the baton, you know, they had, no kidding, just gotten back. They'd been back about 31, 32 days. And when the decision was made, they weren't the Global Response Force. The Global Response Force was the 24th MU. So generally, yes, sir, the Nassau. So generally, that would be the force that responds. But they were due to deploy in about, 2 weeks or so. So we made the decision after talking to Admiral Williams, who was in 2nd Fleet, and Admiral Harvey, PP&O, and then it obviously went up to the service and the tanks, that let's run with the 22nd MU. That's all well and fine, and they responded, as Admiral Harvey said, but here's where the human factors part comes in. And it's something that we all need to think about. Because we always think about hardware, it's important. We always think about programs, it's important. We need to think about the human factor. 3 days after the MU left, we didn't know when they were coming back to the baton. We just didn't know. Well, we only left one rifle company back. The rest of the MU went, again, heavy on mobility, heavy on engineer. But I had a town hall with 500 of the most pissed off wives I'd ever seen. So when you think about that, you have to be very careful on how the force that you're going to send forward and how you're going to flow that. And I say that not to be trite, because it is extremely important. I think one of the things that we need to also realize as we work on Bold Alligator, this isn't new. Bold Alligator has been around since 2008, when the CNO and the CMC told the MEF commanders to get back to our core competencies, revitalize our core competencies, and work that way. But we started with academics. And we all sat there and pat ourselves in the back. Since 1990, between the Naval Force and the Naval Marine Corps, we have done 1,000 amphibious operations. 100 of those are HADR. So we think we're pretty good at what we do, and we are. We didn't come out of the MU program when we obviously went into Desert Shield, Desert Storm, and then to Iraq, and then to Afghanistan. Those 7 ARG-MUs have always been out there. But it's a very thin slice of Marine Corps and Navy, the Naval Force expertise. Very thin. You go to any gathering where there's a large number of officers and staff NCOs, and you ask them how many have you been on an amphibious ship of any type, it's usually 10% or less. And then you ask them what their background is, it's somewhere with a MU, an ARG-MU. So we knew that was extremely important. So when we started academics in 2008, we fully realized that we had lost the bubble on a lot of the things that we were expected to know. Simple, tactical things. And I'm not talking about the big stuff. I'm not talking about how do you integrate the air from the CSG to ESG and the MU, the ARG-MU. How do you do that? We've forgotten things like how do you really work at ATO at sea? How do you really work at a salt landing plant at sea? How do you integrate LCATs with AABs, with Ospreys, with 53s, and then the force protection of the force itself? We've forgotten that. We've forgotten that language. So we knew then back in 2008 that we had a long way to go. All that being said, when we looked at Bold Alligator, you know, we knew up front that this is not your father's Bold Alligator. It's not, frankly, it's not your son's Bold Alligator. This is something a little bit different to one sense. And the thing that is the same is getting back to our 4 competencies. The thing that's a little bit different is we realized that we had to have a totally integrated single naval battle. So when that individual captain or that lieutenant JG or that commander, whatever it happens to be, he understands that single naval battle is when you leave the port, you employ the force, to when you get back home and you deploy the force. And that has to do with how do you employ the force, how do you protect the force, how do you sustain the force, and how do you bring it back home. And oh, by the way, when we looked at Bold Alligator, we turned it over to a seafloat. When we did our rock drill, rehearsal concept drill last Saturday, one of the things that Admiral Harvey picked up on was, you know, what's the political and diplomatic and economic conditions in the country that we're working with? And there was the scenario is not based on any of our major competitors, if you will. We didn't do that. And that wasn't there. So when you have a SIFMIC and you have the naval force ashore and you start to withdraw and turn it over to SIFLIC, what is the impact? You know, we do that, you know, since Iraq and Afghanistan, but I don't think we did that very well with the naval force, and we need to continue to work on that. Bold Alligator 12 is first and foremost, it's a learning experience for Marines and sailors. And I was talking to the new commander at the rock drill. He said, sir, I have never seen so many lance corporals, corporals, and petty officers that were like a kid in a candy shop because they were back aboard amphibs. That's important because when you look at small footprint and bang for the buck, the naval force, I believe, is going to be the force. It's the force now, it should be the force of the future. One of the other things that I don't think we do very well, at least not across the board, is blue-green staff integration. So when we stood up the SIFMIC, the CSG, the ESG, the MEP, that is a totally integrated staff. And that took us quite a while to do that. As a matter of fact, we held quite a few people back from Bold Alligator, Bold BA-11, which, as you know, was a synthetic exercise based aboard some of the amphibs. But we knew that we had to do that because you couldn't lose the traction that we had had over the last 18 months or so, working up towards BA-11 and then BA-12. We wanted to make sure that there was a total understanding across the naval force of naval capability. There's too many Marine officers out there, I'll just talk about Marine officers, who do not understand composite warfare and how it impacts on the landing force itself. We talk about the Amphibious Task Force, we talk about the landing force, but we don't talk about it in the conjunction. And we've forgotten things of when you phase command and control ashore. You know, what's the criteria for that? When do you phase air control ashore? You know, how do you sustain the force? So we're pushing very hard on how do you sustain the force in what we call a medium threat environment. Medium threat environment, we have 2 brigades that are ashore, enemy adversary. They have some helicopters, they have some fixed wing capability. They do not have the ability to totally stop the amphibious warfare, A2. But AD, they do have the capability to ensure that, you know, we have a little bit of difficulty as we move forward inland. So again, how do you do that? How do you integrate soft and general purpose forces? I think you all know as we come out of, you know, Afghanistan, you know, we have to look at how we're going to integrate those 2 great forces, conventional forces or general purpose forces and soft. We saw in our rock drill that we had units out there like MARSOC, they had an MSOC out there, we had OGAs out there, we had MSOCs out there, and when I asked what they were doing, the response I got is they're doing theater security cooperation and doing foreign internal defense. That's fine, early on. But then as you throw in an irregular force, and we have that in the exercise, what are then the responsibilities? How do we gain the expertise of those soft forces to ensure that they're identifying their ISR capabilities, their A2, their AD capabilities, those kind of things. So we're working pretty hard on soft and conventional integration. Last year alone, when we talked about amphibious forces, and another thing that's out there, and I do it all the time as a force provider for the Marine Corps, the COCOMs have 1,700 requirements for naval forces. And of that, we satisfy between the Navy and the Marine Corps about 700. 700 to 800, depending on what it is and where it is. So we need to be able to build on that capability because the requirement, the appetite for the COCOMs will never go away. They understand the utility, the capability, the capacity of the naval force, and I think there will always be more and more requirements for us to do more with the code now. And we need to make sure that as we look at this, we're also doing an LOE-1, limited objective experiment. We're looking at long-haul comms on a rate force that is coming from a sea base and moving in 165 nautical miles. Then how do we sustain that force ashore? Not by the Marine unit that's ashore, from the sea base. So we're forcing the issue with that. We're also using the TAKE and the TABB. And we have a mile of this A-bolt system to move fuel ashore. In this case, we're moving water just because of the environmental impact, so on and so forth. But we haven't done that for quite some time either. So it's a learning experience for the Marines. And the big thing that we really hope to get out of this is the lessons learned. Admiral Harvey assigned a flag officer who was responsible for lessons learned. On the end of February, and invite any and all of you to come down, we'll do a waterfront symposium on the lessons learned from Bold Alligator 12. Because as you know, if you don't do something with an exercise, it's not lessons learned. And we'll be able to go forward into Bold Alligator 15, which is more synthetic only because of cost, so on and so forth. So with that, Admiral Harvey, unless you have any other comments, sir, we'll go into questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, they have a hard deck time of 16:10 to complete here, so please, your questions, and I'll kind of just moderate. Please, sir.
Sir, St. Paris, on the Amphibs. One of the questions I had was on connectors, both the aviation ones and surface ones. For years, we've tried to neck down the number of types or variants of connectors that we have to save money. Have all LCACs or have all small helicopters, what have you. After your experience with Haiti, do you have a different perspective? I know you don't have any lessons learned from Bold Alligator, obviously, but just from the Haiti perspective, do you see the need for varying types of connectors for different mission sets?
Well, yeah, I mean, for instance, what we're doing in Bold Alligator, our best friend is the MV-22. The range that we have to reach, the speed with which we have to move forces, the depth at which we have to sustain those forces. This is a big MV-22 fight we got coming up here. And we need to be able to use those to the maximum of their capability. So right now, I look at that awfully favorably. The lesson from Haiti is there's something out there for everything we've got that's gray and floats. And, or in the case of an LCAC, that rides a little bit above. You know, there's a role for it out there, whether it's an LCU, an LCAC, an AEV, it just doesn't make any difference. So it's up to the commander to take whatever forces are apportioned to him and make the best use of them for the tactical situations that the commander faces. So I wouldn't say there's something that I disregard. I would say there's something in this for everyone. It would be driven by the operational requirements, the missions we have to accomplish in a particular tactical situation we find, but connectors are going to be a big piece of this, whether we get to MLPs in the future that are optimized for this role as they come out and come into the fleet, or we make use of what we have in the MSC fleet, which is a big part of Bold Alligators. How do I get the most out of that MSC fleet, recognizing they're not going to be in the assault echelon, but they are going to have a huge role to play in the sustainment piece of the force ashore. And that force ashore has to be maneuvered and operated to reflect back that I've got to protect that force that's sustaining them. And that was part of the design of this Bold Alligator. So we're going to learn a lot about the connector flow from this and any other characteristics that we might want to see that are suited for this kind of environment, this medium threat environment that General Hejlik spoke of. Did that get out of this thing?
I think the only thing I would add to that, and Admiral Harvey here doesn't have the tactical situation drives, you know, what we use for forces and resources. And I think one of the good things about this is we're driving the point home with Bold Alligator to the forces that are out there. You know, you've got today's force for today's crisis today. A lot of you have heard that before. Fiscally constrained, it's all coming. We know it's already here. The good thing about being fiscally constrained, it forces us to think, and it forces us to innovate, and it forces us to use the forces and resources that we have to the best capability and capacity. So we're forcing that issue pretty hard. Thanks.
Question? Please.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Lieutenant Colonel Page, I'm a fellow at the Atlantic Council. Our current amphibious doctrine, based off what either one of you gentlemen have seen, what are your thoughts on existing amphibious doctrine? Is it outdated? Is it time to go back into the halls of an educational institution and kind of look forward and come up with a new way, as the general mentioned? It's time to think, or does it look like it will suffice today and in the future?
Well, for those of you who follow this closely, when we got going on this, one of the great purposes of this exercise was to drive education. General mentioned it on the green side, and certainly it was equally true on the blue side. I put out a reading list that needed to be completed. I know there were two people who completed it, General Hejlik and me. But I read every damn book on there. It was a lot of reading, you know. But it was very interesting to me because my 500 years of experience that Pete was referring to, straight stick surface stuff with nuclear propulsion thrown in. Okay, not a lot of experience in expeditionary, not a lot of experience in amphibious warfare at all. I mean, just drove right by it. And so I'm doing this reading, and it is a voyage of discovery for me. It is a voyage of discovery, going back from, reading about Gallipoli, going back and reading about all different things going on in World War II, up to the Falklands and beyond. It was fascinating to me. Then you talk about the doctrinal piece. Yes, we're going to learn from this. And no, doctrine today is not sufficient for the forces we have, the capabilities we have today, and that we anticipate tomorrow. Is there going to be, we'll all stop and do a complete rewrite, go to Quantico, and just bring them to their knees on doctrinal ethnic and doctrinal hysteria? No, I don't think so. But I think we're going to start developing a pool of people, educated, well-educated professionals, who are going to be able to take a look at that doctrine and apply it to what we're doing today, apply it to what we think we're going to be doing tomorrow, and get after making sure it reflects what we need to be doing, just like we're doing in the BMD world right now, and what we're learning as we execute the President's phased adaptive approach. Same type of deal. So lots of education. We're going to have to get into the doctrine, and we're going to have to make the doctrine real and relevant for the future we face.
For me, the issue's always been, and probably for some of you, but for me, I admit it, is when you look at doctrine, you talk about STOM and She Strike and She Seal. That's all great. How do you operationalize it? And really, how do you operationalize it? So that's hopefully some of the things we'll get to in the lessons learned issue here. So, the doctrine, I think it always evolves, it always changes. It doesn't always have to drive programs. It can drive TPPs, SOPs, so on and so forth. When Admiral Harvey was talking about the reading list, I think probably the hardest part about amphibious operations, especially in a big exercise like this, is the command relationships and the command control. That's extremely difficult. And one of the things in the readings that what Admiral Harvey was talking about, they had a thing back in World War II, even though it goes back to World War I, but especially World War II, where they called cooperative command. And that's when, the components, whether it was the air component, the ground component, however they were set up, they didn't necessarily have one commander early on. But they did have the realization that they had to work together, make sure that everyone understood their capabilities and their capacity, and they moved resources back and forth. I'm not saying we should do that, because we're probably too far down the lane, if you will, to try and change something like that. But it's something to think about. So as we go through all of this, hopefully, again, that'll be a lot of a lesson learned.
So, Lieutenant Commander Taylor, I'm a fellow here at the Institute. You mentioned long-haul communications may or may not be a challenge in the upcoming exercise. You see where cyber may fit in as far as the command and control element, what it brings or what it does not bring to this exercise?
Yeah,
Define cyber for me.
Well, cyber is the new hot buzzword, but I want to take the space in the satellite communications, the networks, and how
let
we
me
transmit data.
When we designed this exercise, it is done from General Hejlik's and my resources in RAOR. We had training objectives for the Iwo Jima ARC, for the Enterprise Strike Group, from what many of you may remember as a composite exercise, COMP2X, their preparations to deploy. So we had some things we had to get done within this exercise to ensure that these forces went through, got all the checks in the box for being ready to deploy in their upcoming service. So there was some pieces of this that we could not do. For instance, big level, the major ISR play that would obviously be mandatory in an event like this, real world. We didn't have the resources within us, and we wanted to control the exercise because we had specific training objectives we had to get. So we had to, hit a pretty small target. A lot of cyber issues, CNA, CND, that type of stuff. Not a big factor, not because it's not important, because we don't have the resources within the constraints of this exercise to make that a big factor, like I suspect it certainly would be, as you see in virtually all the operations we're conducting today, particularly in the counter-terrorist operations. So you're absolutely right, that's a section of capability today that in the real world plays. It was not something that was going to drive us in this exercise. It would take, in terms of the resources we had and getting us away from the learning objectives that we were going after. So, yeah, it's there. No, it wasn't a big factor here in what we're getting after with BA-12. Does that get at what you're asking?
As far as your question, Commander, on the long-haul columns, it's HF, and it's a very classified program. It's an experiment, so we're looking at it pretty hard. But they're also working with solar and water purification, 165 miles in time.
Admiral Harvey and General Hejlik, a question about the force itself. Looking at setting up the exercise, did you bring in the carrier battle group and the integration with the Amphibious Task Force and its role in what we used to term advanced force operations, preparation of the AOA?
Well, I demanded that we bring a CSG into this exercise. You talked about the doctrine. You talked about the complexity of command and control. If you go back and read from Incheon all through the operations in Korea, from putting them in to taking them out, if you go back and read about the Falklands, and I highly recommend you read Woodward's book, the Cadiff wrote a book, and the Cliff wrote a book. And they're all about the same time period from three very different perspectives. And the C2 issues just blow the whole thing up. It's fantastic. I wanted to get these C2 collisions into Bold Alligator 12, where the commanders had to confront this. We have an awful lot going on, and bringing that CSG and Enterprise CSG into this exercise in support of preparing the battle space, in support of providing ISR, in support of dynamic retasking, from the ATO and, for the operations ashore. That was a huge part of this, to get after that C2 interaction, which I think is going to be probably the most valuable piece that we get out of this exercise. If you're looking for a C2 fight, you can find it. It ain't hard, okay? I mean, it just is not. But, in an operation, you just can't be satisfied with, yelling at each other. You got an objective to achieve and a timeline to meet. So you have to get to a C2 win-win. And I think one of the things we've got here is bringing up a lot of C2 challenges that will force these commanders at a number of varying levels to get to that solution set that enables achieving the objective. That was a very important piece of that.
Paul, that's a great question. And for a while, there was a little bit of pressure to stand up at the JIP thing. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to do that purposely because we were trying to get off the command and control issues in the naval force. So it's a SIP thing. And it's Vice Admiral Buss is the SIP thing. The deputy is a Marine general officer. And it's a totally integrated staff. So we're trying to work it that way. But there was pressure to make it more than it was.
Sir?
Sir Fozzie Miller from the Navy staff. There is a moderate anti-access area denial piece to the exercise. I wonder if you could share some of the goals or lessons learned you hope to get out of operating a CSG and an ESG together in that environment.
Well, I think, Fozzie, one of the things about area denial and anti-access, it's been with us since, people first started doing things to each other that we called combat. I would go back first for just the context of this. Gallipoli, Dardanelles, 1915, the Turks mining the approaches, sank two Royal Navy battleships and a French battleship, and sank them in quite short order and severely disrupted. A2AD is nothing new, okay? It is nothing new. It's what we've been dealing with throughout our history. So I don't think there are a lot of new lessons learned here. It is how the commanders confront the challenge and apportion the forces to meet the objective. We made sure they had plenty to think about. They're going to have to deal with mines. They're going to have to deal with a FACT-FIAC threat. They're going to have to deal with the capability that Hezbollah demonstrated in Lebanon in 2006 to launch a C-802 from the back of a truck, and they hit an Israeli Corvette. We put that into this exercise, that level of threat, to force today's force with today's capabilities on this objective to have to confront it, deal with it, overcome it, and land the force and sustain the force. I'm not too sure we're going to learn a lot new about this. I think we're going to relearn some lessons. We're going to relearn the challenge of apportionment, and that we don't have everything we want when we want it. And then what do you do with that, Commander? Because you've got a mission to accomplish. So I'm not too sure we're going to be breaking new ground in medium threat, area, anti-access area denial, lessons learned. I think we're going to reinforce a lot of lessons we've already learned. And I think we're going to educate some senior commanders in our Navy and our Marine Corps about what they have to be thinking about in this kind of a threat environment.
From the landing force perspective, one of the things we wanted to do too, Harvey, is make sure that the MEV commander in this case, not only did he know what he had, but how did he prioritize that force as it goes to shore and making a medium or moderate A2AD. And I think that's worked out pretty well for us. When you look at what he has actually aboard the ship, and then what he's using as far as synthetic. They've done a pretty good job with it. Will it turn out that way? We will see. We're actually going to do the landing, as you know. We don't know what the sea state is. We don't that'll force him, to do more of a vertical landing, if you will, or more to LTAC, so on and so forth. We're going to splash AUVs off of a TKE, by the way. So there's some pretty good decision-making process on the part of the MEV commander.
And there's one other real important piece of this exercise, and we've referred to it tangentially so far, but too often, we said, hey, what happens ashore? Hey, General Hejlik, hey, your problem, we got you here, see ya. And for General Hejlik, it's, hey, Navy, what's the holdup? I got a job to do. Get us in and get going. Part of this exercise has been very, very focused to make sure that the operations ashore reflect back into what we have to do on D+1, D+2, D+3 to sustain the force to support the fight ashore. And the fact that the Marine commanders have to be aware of this panoply of threats we put out there that may affect this very orderly progression of events in an amphibious assault and the landing and the vertical envelopment on the shore ship-to-objective maneuver that, by the book says, hey, it's A, B, C, D, and E, and that's when you do it, and that's how we do it. Well, some other people get a vote on this. And so the threat at sea is going to impact how the Marine commander is prepared for the fight ashore. In fact, they reflect back into each other. And that's very, very important because I think we have gotten intellectually, we just sort of assumed away a lot of these problems. And this is a capability that in every O-plan, in every comm plan that exists today, this capability that we're demonstrating in Bold Alligator 12 is assumed to exist by the combatant commanders. Okay? There's nothing brand new here. This is what we're supposed to be able to do. And I think we needed to do some real education on all the commanders involved, is that what's happening on the other side of the fence line has a direct impact on the entire operation.
I wish you all could have been down at the Rock Drill on Saturday. Because when you had the composite warfare commanders up there, and the Marine commanders up there, the 06 and the 07 level, walking through the different phases of the operation, you could sit there and watch the light bulbs come on. Not just in U.S. forces, but by the way, the coalition forces. We got the French, we got the UK, we got Italy, we got Spain. That's 4.
7 more. Netherlands Marines, Australia, New Zealand, Germany. We have 11 nations participating in this who found it when the French sent over a big deck. and a very, very competent force with it. A lot of those nations in very difficult circumstances made a big decision to invest in this exercise and what they expect to learn from it. It's a very significant part of this.
And if the weather forced us to go more synthetic, as we get into the exercise, from my perspective, just doing that 3-hour rock drill was well worth all the effort. There is obviously cost associated. A lot of it is sunk cost because of certification of the forces that are out there anyway before they deploy.
George?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I'm George Solhan. I'm one of the department heads, Office of Naval Research, Expeditionary Warfare and Regular Warfare Department. In my opinion, the Navy Marine Corps team is not as strong in the Pentagon as it is down at the Quebec Police. And it translates itself in resources for modernization. What the NO91 and the CNR decide to apply to expeditionary warfare is relatively small compared to some of the other investment areas. What the customers, N85, NIWO, Synchronous Fellows, NECC, get in terms of R&D resources and procurement forces are relatively small. What can Bold Alligator do to mitigate that going forward, improve the teamwork?
Well, what you're talking about is, a beautiful marriage that's gone on now for 236 years. It's had its moments of excitement and passion and everything else that goes with it. And that's not going to change anytime soon. But I think we had a strong commitment between General Hejlik and me as to what we needed to do in the operational arena that I think will reflect back up into program land, here in D.C., where that, as you correctly pointed out, drives so much. And it's driven an awful lot of competition, for a shrinking pool. But I think, I really am kind of an optimist on this. And, I've been around for a while. I've seen it at its worst in the Pentagon, on the Navy staff, and watching relations with the Marine Corps staff. And I've seen it, at its best, when we really did come together on some big things and hang together through some difficult challenges. I kind of believe, that Bold Alligator itself, was that going to change the face of, the humanity out here? No, it's an exercise. But I think what we put into it to bring it off, what we put into it, and that what will come from it, will help us in terms of getting to a common position on many of these programs that could otherwise just prove very, very contentious. And that's part of why it's so important for when we come out with what we've learned from it and what General Hejlik and I take to the Commandant and the CNO together to say, here it is, and this is what we need to provide the nation from the naval service for the future. So, Roger for the reality of life inside the Beltway, but I think we have the opportunity to make a real difference here, and I believe we are.
You can't build relationships on personality. It doesn't work. It works for a while, maybe on the commanders that you have out there for a specific period of time, but it doesn't work. And one of the things that Admiral Harvey brought up at one of the earlier sessions was the policy group up at the Naval War College, and what they bring to doctrine and so on and so forth. And then how do you operationalize that? How do you exercise that? And, over the years, especially the last 10, that's kind of gone away only because everyone's been so extremely busy. So we stood up an Amphibious Capability Working Group, and a lot of you are aware of that. That wasn't just a Marine thing. Admiral Harvey had 2 Navy captains and his admiral involved in it the entire way too. And now we stood up the Ellis Group. And the Ellis Group is really the counterpart, if you will, a couple steps down from the Halsey Group. And they'll take some of those, problems or concerns they have across the Naval Force and Naval Engagement Board. And if they have to get past the ACMAC or the Vice CNO, we'll take it to the Navy Marine Corps Warfighter. So we do build those relationships built on knowledge across both of the forces. So I think it'll work. I think we've all been around a long time. And, in every marriage there's problems. We don't get that. So we just continue to work on it.
Yeah, one thing that's really important, if you look at our history, and I know many of you understand this, but I particularly have always been fascinated by the interwar history and how the Navy and the Marine Corps, during that period, you talk about constrained resources, try 1920 to 1939. That defined the term in a way that we have no comprehension of. and a world that had gone extraordinarily down the road of pacifism even in the face of the rise of Hitler. But during that period of time, the Navy and the Marine Corps found a way to do that deep thinking that General Hejlik talked about earlier. And it was done in Washington via the General Board. It was done at the War College via a very robust wargaming capability. And then that was translated to the fleet for what they call the annual fleet problem, where you take very specific issues that were developed during the war game, and then you went down and actually, here's a thought, worked them with the fleet, learned the lessons, and you developed this virtuous cycle of thinking, wargaming, acting, relearning. And that's how we got to so many of these things that we used with great effect during the war. But it took that kind of a cycle, and it took 22 years to get there. You know, we need to reestablish that kind of a cycle in our thinking. And I think that if we can do that, and we get the Ellis Group, and we get the Halsey Group, and we get the intellectual capital of our two services harnessed at the start of the problem, then you inevitably lead to solutions that will be found common to the goals of both services, which will make the march to program, I think, that much easier. It's never easy. Secretary Young's back there, and he's just looking at me and saying, hey, this stuff doesn't go just quite the way he said it. But I do believe that without an intellectual underpinning, and what we can get to is a common intellectual underpinning, that if we have that makes everything else, I think, flow in a much smoother fashion for the future. So that's what I'm hoping for.
George, and I think there has to be a balance between the service, the institution, and the operational forces. Does the institution drive the operational forces, or do the operational forces drive the institution? Well, I think it's both. I really do think it's both. And I think we've gotten away from that, at least on the green side. And I think this will force the issue, so we do things a lot better together.
I'll throw one gentleman out to you. Newscast recently has the amphibious platform, the Ponce, possibly being picked up by SOCOM with the paucity of amphibs. Is this, how do you square that? And does this get into a roles and functions issue?
Yeah, the instantaneous transmission of erroneous information globally is really a fascinating phenomenon. So, the Ponce, a wonderful old ship. I suspect some of you out there have sailed on her by the look of maturity. 41 years old, she was well on the road to decommissioning. Time for Ponce to go. She served nobly and she served well for many, many years. There had been a long-standing, and I emphasize the word, a long-standing requirement for a float-forward staging base. And the former Chief of Staff, the Commander 5th Fleet, sitting here, acknowledging that requirement as we speak. But it was out there. And as we look to, as General Mattis reinforced with the CNO, there's a lot of things that we have been looking for. The float forward staging base was one. So I had this ship that was about 2 months from decommissioning. We had taken rousted out the anchor chains. I mean, this thing was rising about 3 feet above, its water line. Everything was coming off. So is there something we could do to respond to that on an interim basis while the permanent fix for a float forward staging base for mine countermeasure forces, okay? AFSB-I, interim, for mine countermeasure forces. It is not a soft, dedicated platform, okay? It will handle 53s, like an LPD can. It will act as a mothership for the MCMs, which is what we did with the USS Cleveland in 2003, when she acted as the mothership for 4 MCMs and a 4-ship 53 detachment during OIF. And they were attached to my strike group, and they were assigned, they worked between Crete and Suez Canal, just in case things went south down there. So we had this capability. I looked at it and I said, we can deliver something here. And so we sent forward the initiative to make it an interim afloat forward staging base for mine countermeasure support in the CENTCOM AOR. And that's what we have done. It'll be a USS. It'll be MSC crewed to give me real flexibility on how long we can sustain it. It'll have a U.S. Navy CO, a small detachment of 50 sailors, MSC crew. And I'll get to the point about the amphibious capability. It will be able to launch and recover the mine sled that the 53s tow. That's its amphibious capability. It is not being built, for special operating forces to plant themselves on and sustain operations from. That's just not a fact. In terms of the amphibious capability, do we have enough now? No. But is this a decision that was needed to be made? That ship was going away anyhow. Now we can get some more use out of it. I have the LPDs coming online. Many of you just know LPD from the early days of San Antonio. We're well beyond that. The latest ships that are coming out in that LPD class are well constructed, well tested, and they bring one hell of a lot to the fight. And you show me a Marine who doesn't want one of those LPDs versus, hey, bring back the Ponce and that's where we'll go. So, yeah, was it an issue about taking that ship out of the fleet? It was gone out of the fleet, okay? Now I had the opportunity to get some real capability out of it that was needed in theater for that mine countermeasures mission. We're doing that, and I think that the other ships we have coming out will make up for and just keep sustaining the numbers, which, as General mentioned, are taking a dip from where we want to be. You know, that 38, that real requirement, 33, looks like with the fiscal situation long-term will support, and we've got to claw our way back up to that. So, long answer to a short question, I'm sorry.
Please, Brian.
Good afternoon, sir. Brian Salas says today's force is a heavy force after 10 years of combat and counterinsurgency operations. So as we're developing Bold Alligator, what were some of the challenges that you really have to examine? What's the force look like now, the amphibious force?
Well, let me get one quick thing in, because I think General Hejlik is the expert on this, but part of the institutional learning, the Harvey learning that's going on. I had an opportunity to talk to a young Marine sergeant who is responsible for driving these vehicles onto the ship and then getting them stowed on the ship. And it's very interesting to see doing that on an LPD-17, which was constructed for vehicles that are quite different than the vehicles, many of the vehicles we have today. That's just a fact of the matter. We designed that ship 10, 12, 15 years ago. The LHDs, lower vehicle stowage on an LHD, designed for a certain type of vehicle in square and cube. The Marine Force has grown heavier over the last 10 years. If you take a look at an Osprey versus a 46, Joint Strike Fighter versus a Harrier, the same in the vehicles. And so you got to get more stuff that's now bigger, which is a real challenge for us. And I think that's part of the issue that is making this so important to me. Just look in comms. General Hejlik has now put Marine communicators permanently assigned to the amphibious ship because the comms had diverged. Here's what the Marines need to have operate. Here's what we work at sea. When you get to time to marry it up, for a big event, boy, we have a lot of issues. And so this divergence on some of the fundamental issues that then come together when we put it all in a package on a ship at sea is really a big deal. And I think you're highlighting that this is where the programmatic piece has got to come together. We'll design this ship. The vehicles have got to fit. And we've got to design a ship with a view of what's coming on Marine vehicles, or else we haven't done our job.
And Brian, back to today's force, it's heavy, just like you said, we all know that. For those of you who are new commanders or BLT commanders, or AMFIB guys, there's a few of you out there, I know that, the commander has got to make a decision on what he thinks is going to be the requirement for the combatant commander to include the comm plans and the TSE or phase 0 things that he will do. And then he's going to have to load accordingly. And then what's the reach back capability? Will there be an amphibious operations, a fly-in echelon or a follow-on echelon? You know, he's gonna have to make that decision. You know, we didn't, the Navy and the Marine Corps, probably because of where we were with Iraq and Afghanistan, we were forced to go heavier, at least on the Marine Corps with the vehicles, because it became force protection. We all get that. It really did become force protection and mobility. It doesn't work on the Amphibious. I will say this, though, about the LTD-17 class, and for those of you who work, again, on the old ships, the capability of that ship to move around gear, equipment, rolling stock, is 100 times better than it was on the Austin, the Ponce, and the old LPDs. So, you know, the commander, at least the ground commander, has got the, you know, at least the capability to look at it and say, I can combat load this way for this com plan or for this PSC event or this HAGR. And oh, by the way, it does give me flexibility to pick and choose and switch from aboard the ship itself. It's just a choice he's going to have to make, at least in the near term. I think you all know we're working towards a joint, you know, JLTV with the Army. We're going to buy 5,000 of those vehicles. You know, it is a smaller vehicle, it's a lighter vehicle, but we still have the MATV, we've got the MRAP, we have the MBTR. Those are heavy systems. And for right now, that's just the way it is.
Other question? Behind first, and Brian will come back to you.
Gentlemen, right now there's at least participating in some of the exercises, the planning exercises, there are several capability gaps that have been identified, things like naval surface fires, mine countermeasures, having to go into port to reload, you know, ship protection capabilities. What we have the force we have today, and you're doing an exercise. What workarounds have you all discovered as you work up towards this, or do you think you'll discover in Bold Alligator to work around and find solutions to these capability gaps? I know some of these systems will eventually come online or are programmed to come online, but the problems that exist today.
Well, I mean, and the commander doesn't plan to use a capability that doesn't exist, so, you know, in terms of workaround, you have what forces you have. I'm not really following it. There's a kit bag. That commander's got what's in that kit bag, whether it's marine aviation, it's going to be available to them, or the Naval Aviation Office CSG, that obviously, if we don't have the surface fires that will reach far enough inland, you know, from a 5-inch rifle, how do you compensate for that? Well, it's probably going to be an aviation component that will compensate for that. I think that's what we've been doing for quite some time. I don't see anything like that changing dramatically in Bold Alligator 12.
Rob Counselor, just to tie in with that, when I heard that question, the first thing that comes to my mind is we use what we have, current capabilities, but oftentimes in the exercises we tend to prepare dust the capability better than it actually is. And in the mine countermeasure area would be key in my mind, especially the contentious issues for the Navy and Marine Corps has always been very shallow water and the surf zone areas, not only for command and control, but in that ferry dust arena of, well, we think the lane's wide enough, and the LCAC really, it didn't really go outside the lane, so let's just continue to play it, because that's usually relegated down to the lower level of, well, we really want to get the command and control down, so we'll gloss over the actual combat losses or to that degree. So my question would be, for the play of this problem, how much are we really getting into that? The focus is really on command and control, obviously that needs to be worked out. We know there are gaps, especially in mine countermeasures, but if that's not really the brunt of a learning objective out of the exercise, and it's understood by the commanders, then that's fine. But, and again, it wouldn't be another lesson that's relearned. We know we have a gap. We know that the technology is lagging, and we just have to make do with what we've got.
Right. I wouldn't say, you know, I'm just going to tell them, hey, just very dusted. You know, we'll pretend everything went really well. You know, we have training objectives we got to achieve. The landing force will be landing. Okay. We will go through the process of the commanders having to deal with shallow water mines. as well as getting a Q route established that we can flow the force into. So is it fairy dust? No. Are we going to have all the capabilities we'd like to have there that we would actually exercise in real time to demonstrate that ability? No. But we are going to achieve the objectives of the training objectives we have to. So I think it's pretty a wide-eyed realization of what we don't have, and we're not going to pretend something that works that we know doesn't work. We'll simply say that's a gap that we have right now, and you know, various entities are working on closing those gaps, and you know, we'll just have to take it from there. I'm not sure I'm getting at what you're. I'm not pretending it doesn't exist, and certainly what we learn from this is going to reinforce what you just said. You know that hey, we've relearned this now 48 times in the last 5 years, and now this will be number 49. Well, maybe that's the best I can get out of this one right now.
The other thing we did too is, I'd like to say we're not going to fairy dust anything, but we will. I really don't like that term, but it's been around forever and ever. There are simulated forces out there, and we did that purposely to force the planning, the coordination, and the execution of the total force. We did do that, but again, we will land the landing force. As far as, if you don't have the capability that you would like to have, Admiral Harvey went back to swimmers in the water. We lost the Navy diver, EOD, just here when we kicked off the exercise. You've got to do that. You've got to exercise the force that you have. So in that case, we're not fairy dusting. We just know what our limitations are, our gaps. And hopefully that'll come out in spades as we go through the exercise.
Derek in the back.
Mr. Derek, Mr. Follow here at the Potomac Institute. We all talked about we don't have enough amphibious capacity and execution capacity as we'd like. Any new insights, having worked with 11 of our allies in this exercise, will maybe they be able to help close some of that gap for us in the future?
Well, I mean,
going into it?
Yeah, I mean, look at the events in the Mediterranean earlier last year. It's going to have to be a certain political situation that drives that at the start, how much others will play and how much they can play, how much they will play. But I certainly believe one of the things we wanted to have the international participation is because it's going to be a factor in any real-world operation we do. And I'd be a fool, and I think any commander would be a fool to say, hey, if there's an operation plan that has a commonality of interest with a number of nations, and we don't seek to use what those nations can bring, whatever capacity, however little, however great, that's just something you would seek to do, whether under the authority of NATO or the UN or however it might work out politically. But clearly that's a big objective for us, and that's what we're playing in this exercise. Is that what you're asking?
Well, actually, it was more, was there a capability or capacity that allied or a combination of allies maybe if you weren't aware before you started this exercise? Any insight you picked up when working with them?
No, nothing that jumped up at us and said, holy mackerel, we had no idea they could do that.
Real good comment on it. We don't have enough amphibs. We have better capable amphibs now. We'd like to have 38. Should we like to have 48? The fact of the matter is we're not. So that when you look at the equipment that we have, for instance, Admiral Harvey and myself and both service headquarters worked very, very hard to get the scan eagle on the LSD. And now we've got them on both coasts. Which one goes out with the
Dunstan.
Thank you. The Dunstan Hall that's getting ready to go out with the Army on the 24th. So, that's a $10 million bill that the Navy and the Marine Corps pay. So, as you evolve through your systems and whatever they happen to be, there is a natural evolution. And frankly, like Admiral Harvey said, part of that is putting, Marine Corps communicators back on the amphibs. And we took them off because we had to. Now we need to put it back on. Because when we talk about backbone structure on comms gear, especially with the mirrors in the yards, it's not there. So what do? We strap everything on, and then we leave and take it all off, and we still got the same problem. Just, one view to the next, to the next, to the next. So we're going to try and fix things like that.
We've got time for one more question. Brian?
Sir, if no one else.
You got it.
Okay. Sir, you talked about the nation's expectations in the beginning and with the shrinking budgets and that kind of thing. Are there shrinking capability sets? Are there things that you're saying that you're pushing back up and saying we have to change the time frame, eliminate this capability, be it from the HABRs to
Well, what my discussions with CNO is, when I give him my recommendations, how he goes into the world he lives in up here, I said, with whatever fleet size we end up with, the fleet we have today, the fleet we may have in 5 years, how do we balance the sustainment of that fleet with the pace of operations that's going to be expected? I mean, that's the issue. There's no law out there that prevents you from overdriving the fleet. There's no law out there that mandates a balanced set of operations where I get to make, the old Fram oil filter commercial. Pay me now or pay me later. But we will pay, to sustain a ship to the end of its service life. We can do it the easy way, we can do it the hard way. But that issue of balance between what the combatant commanders are directed to do by the Secretary of Defense, the Commander-in-Chief, to the global employment of the force, what they're told, go out and achieve this, and then what the service chiefs are given, here's your force with which we will respond to the combatant commanders. That's the incredibly difficult decisions that are made every day under the global employment of the force and global force management. And so there's no magic answer to this. I'm not going up and saying, stop this, stop this, stop that. I'm going up and saying, here's what I can give you, CNO, and sustain this fleet, sustain the aircraft maintenance, sustain the ship maintenance, sustain the people and the training that we have to do over the course of their sea duty, and give you the kind of ships, the kind of submarines and aviation squadrons that can accomplish the missions they're going to be expected to do over when they do deploy. So no magic answer. I'm not saying stop this, stop that. I'm saying here's what I've got, here's what I need to do to sustain it, here's where we are today, here's what the requests are, and we've got some work to do to make sure everything stays in balance. But I will refer you to one thing, Title 10. Title 10 U.S. Code, Section 5062, United States Navy Composition and Functions. 5063, United States Marine Corps Composition and Functions. The law says what the Navy and Marine Corps are supposed to do. Not Harvey, The law says, here's what we expect out of our nation's Navy, here's what we expect out of our nation's Marine Corps. And then the Congress authorizes and appropriates funds to deliver, for us to deliver on what the law expects us to be able to do. So it's not up to me to say, stop doing X. It's up to me to say, here's what I've got, here's what I can do, here's what I recommend to make sure we stay in balance. And then we'll make a decision and we'll carry it out.
Anything to add?
The only thing I would say is, the American people expect a lot from the naval forces, and we all get that. And as we go through, the whole budget issue and sequestration, that's still hanging out there. We're going to have to be able to work with what we have and make sure that our Marines and sailors on the naval force are, first of all, they're educated. What are the capabilities they have? What are the gaps? What can we do with today's force? We're going to have to do that. And we're going to have to make sure that we continue to integrate the forces. And if we don't do that, it's the old thing about, you're stronger together than you are two separate unities, if you will, or entities, if you will. So we are stronger together. I just think that, we get that. We just need to continue to push forward.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights. On behalf of Mike Swetnam, our CEO, and General Gray.
Thank you, sir. JP.
Thank you very much. They have to get out of here, but there's beer in those coolers over there for anybody who can stick around.